Hello, I'm Will Pemberton with the City of Fort Worth Parks and Community Services, Community Tree Planting. We're here at Rolling Hills in Fort Worth. I am the crew leader for the tree production for the park system. And here at Rolling Hills, we provide trees for parks, our city parks, special events, and projects. We are a small team of individuals, myself along with currently 2 other employees. We have 1 other additional employee that will be hired on shortly. But it's a small group of individuals that care and plant and take care of the trees for City of Fort Worth Parks. Our territory is extremely large. We do cover all of Fort Worth. We have no limited areas of town that we don't go, so it is a large territory for such a small group of trees. Here at the tree farm, our main focus and main goal is providing trees for the parks, and it's basically for the beautification of the City of Fort Worth parks. We're very fortunate to have a tree farm. We're one of the few in the nations that has a municipality tree farm. Everything that we do here is in-house as far as planting, growing, propagation. There are some times that we do order trees outside of the area in case of in situations where we might not have valuable seed collection or trees that are available at the time. So therefore, we do have to sometimes purchase outside of the city for trees. The benefit of the tree farm with us, the unique benefit of the tree farm for us, is that we propagate the seeds in areas that we go and we collect seeds. We know where the seeds are most in abundance and health-wise. We'll go to those certain areas of trees and we'll collect the seed and acorns, bring them back here to the tree farm. We have a process that we propagate, putting the seeds into refrigeration, cold storage. And then from there, as you can see behind me, we start off in this greenhouse. This is called Greenhouse 1, and these are called bullets. And this is kind of the beginning stage of what we do for providing trees for the tree farm. The tree farm originated back in the 80s under the City of Fort Worth Park and Recreation Department. Originally, it was the United States Federal Corrections Narcotics Farm of the 1930s, and at the time there was only 2 in the nation, this one being in Fort Worth and the other one being in Lexington, Kentucky. And when it was established back in the 1930s, it was a working production farm of crops and cattle and dairy and poultry. And it was all self-sufficient because this whole area in the 30s was all considered farmland, and it was pretty rural, and it was away from the city limits. And it was the intentions to be that way so that the individuals that were incarcerated out here, it was a narcotics farm, and unfortunately at the time there was a problem with narcotics, and those inmates were brought out here to be self-sufficient and learn how to grow crops of corn, wheat, and dairy. And then when we took it over in the 80s, the agreement with the federal property was for us to keep it and maintain it as a park property. Originally, it was under a lease agreement through the federal government. Then City of Fort Worth eventually took ownership of the land, and the land is approximately 77 acres. And I believe at this time it is the largest single site of land that the City of Fort Worth owns as far as a working office or working compound. You can go to like the Nature Center, which those are all public areas. They're much greater land acreage, but as far as a tree farm area, we utilize about 30 acres of the 77 acres. Not all the 77 acres is used out here. The greenhouse that we're in right now, which is Greenhouse 1, it was actually constructed during the 30s, and it was part of the narcotics farm. And so this would have been the greenhouse for starting vegetables that would later on be put out to the outdoor environment. But with us, with the City of Fort Worth, the forestry department is the oldest urban forestry municipality department in the state of Texas. We propagate over 30 species of trees, and that includes bur oaks, red oaks, cedar elms, Chinese pistache, red buds. There's a few others I'll have to think about. Live oaks. The trees that we don't propagate here are the trees that are considered a nuisance or not really recommended, is like Bradford pear. Those are weak wood trees, and those are trees that we absolutely do not propagate or plant. We try to stick with the native trees as much as possible here at the tree farm, but sometimes we're limited on that because when we go to plant trees in urban settings, sometimes it doesn't allow us to plant a large tree such as a red oak or a bur oak because we're limited for space, whether it be the city right-of-way or the overhead. So therefore we diversify, and we use Eve's necklace, red buds, smaller growth, mature height trees for those type of settings. We collect every year about 8,000 seeds and acorns, and we had talked about earlier that we have locations that we've been going to for the 26 years I've been here at the tree farm, and we go to those locations because we know that we can find dependable seed and acorns from established trees, and we want to continue that gene of that excellence in that tree, and that's the reason why we go to those sites. When we go to pick a tree acorn out, we don't go to just one red oak. We'll pick probably 50 trees of red oaks in different sites to get a variety, and that way it helps us to ensure we get a really good germination rate. And right now, germination rate for us is pretty high. It's taken us a long time to master it, but right now we're probably anywhere from 95–96% successful in germination rate. At Rolling Hills Tree Farm, we currently have in production about 15,000 trees, and that includes the starting size of these red oaks all the way up to field-grown trees. We also grow trees that are in 5-gallon size containers up to 15–20-gallon size container. Along with that, we have an average of 1,500 free trees that we give out, and that could be everything from neighborhood associations, HOAs, to we do a partnership with Mayfest. We give out tree seedlings at Mayfest in this size tree for the citizens of Fort Worth or guests at Mayfest. And we help to encourage individuals to plant a tree, and it's quite rewarding once we go back and we look at the sites that citizens have planted trees from a little seedling like this, that a tree could end up being 15 feet tall or 20 feet tall when we go back after several years. There's been a lot of studies on planting trees, and it's everything from, of course, the first one is beautification of a city. Also for erosion control, we have such heavy rainfalls in Fort Worth, and it helps to slow down the amount of rainfall and erosion that we have. Of course, it cleans the air. The one that I like the most is habitat for wildlife. Here at the tree farm, we have a lot of established trees in the back, and we have a lot of wildlife here, including red-tailed hawks, and we have foxes and rabbits and skunks, raccoons. So it's a very important for habitat for wildlife as well. Once the trees are into this size, what we call the bullet, once they come into this size, depending on the species, they could stay in this size container from 18 months up to 2 years, sometimes 2.5 years. We try not to leave them too long in this size container because it is a very small space for root growth, so it has to be monitored and watched. And what we'll do is we'll come in here and we'll remove the trees out, and we'll look at the root zone to see how much root growth has taken up into the size of the container, and that'll tell us when it's really time to start planting up to the next size. Next size from this would be up into 3 gallons to 4 gallon size container. You don't want to go too large too quick on a tree this small, because if you do, you end up stunning that tree because you have all this soil around a young tree like this. It's going to stay wet for long periods of time. It's better to keep it a little bit root bound. So this will go into a 3 to 4 gallon size container, and it'll stay in that size container for a year to 2 years, maybe 3 years, depending on, again, the variety of tree. Then from there we'll look at it again and decide if it's going to go up into the next size container, or if it stays at that 5 gallon size, if it's going to go into an HOA. And the HOA projects that we do with the Homeowners Association are 5 gallon size trees. And the reason being is the 5 gallon is an easy size to manage, to plant, to carry, and it's been a really, really successful program for us. The tree program that we have is for City of Fort Worth residents, and what we do is we have on our website, and it gives all the instructions on how to contact us and how to fill out the forms. And there's basically a form with a grading system that tells us how that request ranks, and it's based off of location. If it's a city tree, it has to be planted between curb and sidewalk, or if there's not a sidewalk, it'd be the city right of way. And if it's a HOA project, which we have a lot of HOA projects, they have a lot of area that's called green belt, which is basically developers reserve land that's dedicated for parkland, and so those trees are planted in those locations as well. We also do some special requests with special projects with TRWD, which is Tarrant Regional Water District. We've done some projects with them around lake area projects. As one example is Benbrook Lake. I have been a part of a memorial tree for a fallen officer that was shot in the line of duty of City of Fort Worth. So there's multiple requests for trees, but for trees that are planted by the City of Fort Worth citizens, it's all on the city right-of-ways, and they are responsible for maintaining, watering, and taking care of that tree. We've been really fortunate to have a really great partnership with volunteers. We really depend on volunteers because we're such a small staff and limited of what we can do here. So volunteers play an important role in coming to the tree farm, and we have a sign up for it, and all we ask is that they dedicate at least maybe 4 hours of time out here at the tree farm, and we try to keep the groups manageable to where it's like 25 or less. And everything that we do out here with volunteers can be everything from potting up trees, cleaning, sweeping, pulling weeds, general greenhouse maintenance, and it also serves as an educational program for those volunteers. We've been really extremely fortunate with a local high school, which is Castleberry High School, and we've had an incredible partnership with the special needs program with those students. And those are typically 11th grade, 12th grade students that come out to the tree farm. And it's a spring program, and we work with them with teaching them the benefits of trees and showing them how to pot up trees and maintain trees. And so they're really been a very successful program that, I think maybe 18 years or 15 to 18 years they've been a part of us coming out here to the tree farm. Okay, here at the greenhouse one, we have above my head here, this is a vent tube, and what this does is we have a heating system to the back of the greenhouse, and it's all automated with thermostats along with the fan that inflates this tube. When we have night temperatures that drop down below 55 degrees typically, sometimes during the daytime, but mostly it's nighttime temperatures that we have to use the heating system. The system will turn on, and then the fans will turn on to inflate this heating tube. And what it does is it distributes the heat through the perforated holes on the side right here, and it keeps it at a level to where the plants are. We also use it for summertime cooling. We can open up the back vent of the greenhouse and turn the heaters off and just use it for outdoor ventilation. To the back of the greenhouse, we have these large exhaust fans. They're also on a thermostat, and that helps in the summertime to pull cool air through the house. It gets extremely hot in here. We've had it as hot as 125 degrees, and that's one thing you just can't have for very long. Plants will not survive in that type of temperature, so it's very, very important to have proper ventilation. On our irrigation system, everything is also automated. We have controllers inside our break room that we can monitor and set the time for the irrigation to come on. The unique thing about the way we have it set up here, each table is on a different zone, so we can eliminate one station. If we have Eve's necklace, which typically doesn't take a lot of water, we can turn down or turn off that station while keeping the remaining of the greenhouse irrigated. So you don't have to shut everything off. We have 4 stations in here, so that's a really neat, a unique way to set different zones for different requirements of trees. Not all the trees need the same type of watering habits. Some trees are more drought prone, where others need frequent watering, such as bald cypress. City of Fort Worth started thinking about protection of trees many, many years ago. In 1873, the first tree ordinance was written, and this is a copy of it. This is ordinance number 19, and basically it states that it was a protection of trees and ornamentals that were on city property, city right-of-ways, and if you were to hitch a horse or an ox or a mule to a tree and cause damage to that tree, that the individual could be fined of $10. $10 would be divided between the person reporting the crime, and then the other part would be going to the city of Fort Worth. So, 1873, we were already thinking about the protection of trees, and we still continue that to today, as far as being conscious and making sure that our trees are well taken care of within the city of Fort Worth. This is a cold storage for our seed collection and acorn collection. It serves a dual purpose. It's actually our refrigerator for our lunches as well as seed collection. But it works. And what we do is we keep the temperature in the refrigerator around 40-45 degrees. We don't want to keep it any colder than that, because if we cause it to freeze, it will end up causing damage to the seed collection. So 40-45 degrees is an ideal temperature for cold storage. We go to locations throughout the city of Fort Worth that we know that we had talked about that is a good source of seed, and each bag is labeled with a date. This bag here is Mexican white oak, which is TCU berry, and this is on October of 2020. What we'll do is we'll keep these acorns in cold storage, and we'll monitor them about every 2 to 3 weeks. And what we do is we'll turn the bags and we'll rotate them and looking for what we call our tails. And basically, it's the first stage of the root development. And these right now are too young to have any tails on them, but usually the tail will come out about 1/4 of an inch. And once they start producing that little tail on that root zone, then we'll hand select them out, and we'll go ahead and put them into what we have out in greenhouse 1 we talked about, were the bullets, and we'll put those into the containers out there. Another step to making sure we have success on germination percentages is we do what's called a float test. And a float test, when we collect seed, we'll put it in a 5-gallon bucket of water, and we'll dump the seeds or the acorns into that container. Everything that floats to the top of the surface, we skim off, because that seed is no good. It's either got a weevil or an insect damage into it, which caused a lot of air, and therefore they'll surface. Everything that settles to the bottom is our seed that we collect, and we put into cold storage. Okay, these are Chickapin oak, and these were harvested from one of our local parks, which is Cross Baker. It's in the southwest part of Fort Worth, and these were harvested at October the 2nd, 2020. And we talked earlier about the tails. This is what we look for when they're in these bags in cold storage. Once we start seeing this tail coming out, then that's about the time we want to start potting them up into those bullets. If we leave them in the bags too long, they will eventually start to mildew and rot. So there's a really short time that we have to get these potted up. This is greenhouse 2 at Rolling Hills, and this is what we call is a cold frame greenhouse. This house does not have any type of heat source, and we really don't need it because we're growing trees, and trees are really are durable when it comes to cold temperatures. And the benefit of a house like this is what's called a low profile. When you have a low profile house, you can retain the heat a lot longer in it, especially over cold night temperatures. We just finished putting a new roof on it, so it's 2 layers of 4mm plastic. So you've got 8mm of plastic on the roof, and then on the very top is shade cloth. Typically in the winter months you would take the shade cloth off because you want to get that heat to transfer into the house, but we found out by leaving the shade cloth on, it protects the plastic. And if you look to your right, we have a sycamore, and sycamores are prone to limb drop, and it's the wrong tree, wrong site. We don't want that tree this close to a house because the small limbs, when they do fall, they can puncture a plastic roof. So that's why we have the shade cloth left on at this time. The dimensions of the house is approximately 96 feet long and 35 feet wide. We at this time we're growing everything from chickapin oaks to red oaks. Or primarily is what occupies the house mostly. At the very back are cedar elms. So this house is kind of a holding stage from greenhouse 1. This would be the next stage for holding trees, and typically we'll hold trees in here for maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, just depending on the species. And then one thing I didn't touch about or talk about later or earlier was when we grow trees out here at the tree farm. When you buy a tree like at your local nursery, trees are grown from the growers at a very rapid pace. We do it differently here. When we're growing trees, we do use fertilizer, tree food on our production, but we use it at a very minimum amount. And the reason being is we want these trees to acclimate into the natural setting. If we were to be feeding the trees every weekly or every monthly, that tree becomes dependent on that food. So when we talk about trees growing at a slow rate, that's our intention, and that's the reason why we want them to. We want them to not to be that surge growth. We don't want that surge growth on a tree because, like I said, if you put it into a setting, it's going to stress out during the heat, during water, the environment. It's much easier to acclimate a tree when it's growing on a low feeding program versus something that's been fed every weekly or every 2 weeks. Here at the tree farm, we do use a water-soluble food for supplement fertilizing our trees. Along with, we do use a dry food as well. But during summer months, as we all know, water-soluble foods are much safer to use. You won't have the burning effect as you would as a dry fertilizer. But we use a product here which is called a Siphon-X, and basically what it is, it's a dilution of 1 tablespoon per 1 gallon. We have the option of either running a powdered water-soluble iron, like right now I think we're using iron, and then we also use a 20/20, which is Peters. And we'll use that as needed, usually during the summer months, when trees are stressed out, and whether it be nutrient deficiency or if it's just heat related. Usually I like using the iron during the summer months because that helps to boost that green foliage that we want. Early spring, that's when we'll use the feeding program as the 20/20, and we'll do maybe 2 or 3 feedings as needed. And again, we just don't want to over-fertilize. We just want to just maintain that tree and maintain that growth, and just keep that tree as healthy as possible. And when we do keep a tree healthy like that, it does minimize the insect infestation. And that's the great thing about trees is there's not really much prone to insect disease or insect problems. Spider mite might be our biggest problem, and along with aphids, but that's easily controlled with basically just proper nutrition of the tree and keeping that tree healthy. Also up above, we do have an automated irrigation system here. We talked about zones, and it's important that when you have a greenhouse system, you want to have zones set up to where you can regulate that water amount. This one has 2 zones. We have typically We try to put trees that maybe don't require as much water on one side versus others that require a heavier amount of water. Right now it's kind of balanced, and but it gives us a great option to where if we were growing like bald cypress is a good example. We've grown bald cypress. Bald cypress in summertime have to be watered 2 times a day. They're just a heavy water consumption when they're in containers. But we do sometimes in the summertime, depending on the heat and temperature, we do have a system that will come on twice a day, and it can be from 3 minutes to 5 minutes to 7 minutes, depending on soil condition, soil type, and how well established those trees are. So water is very important when you're growing trees. There's a threshold of overwatering too much or not enough. If you overwatered, you're going to end up probably killing the tree, if not stunning it. Underwatering, you're definitely going to stunt the tree, and you could possibly lose the tree. But the underwatering can slow the growth down tremendously, especially on trees like red buds. We found out that if we underwater those red buds, they'll react really quickly. They like to keep a pretty consistent moisture content. Okay, we're here at Greenhouse 2. And in the summertime, we have to ventilate this house because it can get extremely hot. And the unique feature on this house is it has 2 sides. It has what's called a roll-up side wall or a roll-up curtain, and it's manual. It takes a little bit of effort to get the house to roll up, and it's kind of a gradual roll-up. You don't want to do it too quick. I'm not going to roll it up part way because it's usually a 2-person job, but basically it allows that ventilation to enter into the house, exit out. And the benefits of having that cross ventilation is powdery mildew. Powdery mildew with a house like this, you have such high humidity, stagnant air. You've got to get that airflow to go in and out quickly to minimize that powdery mildew on trees. So this is what we use, and actually sometimes in the wintertime, our winters here can sometimes be warm. We have to open it up to ventilate it, especially if you're in there working. In the wintertime, typically if it's, let's say if it's 50 degrees outside, or even if it's 40 degrees outside, it could be 20 degrees warmer inside this house, and sometimes 25 degrees. We've had it pretty warm. And that's a benefit. If it's cold conditions outside, you can go inside a greenhouse where it's nice and warm and work. Okay, now we're at Greenhouse 3, and beside me here is a 2,000-gallon tank of rainwater. We have a total of 5 tanks, 10,000 gallons. We're collecting water off the gutter-connected greenhouse, and what's amazing about this is the collection. If we receive 2 inches of rain, we could almost half fill all these tanks just off of 2 inches of rain. It's an incredible amount of water that's coming off that gutter. You wouldn't think that a tank would fill up halfway. We've been able to fill all 5 tanks in 2 heavy rainstorms. So the rainwater for us is a supplement water. We use it for watering in this greenhouse. If for some reason our city water was to go down, we have a backup system. And also we use it as for spot watering. There are some trees that really prefer the rainwater, and the number 1 tree, believe it or not, is red buds. Red buds do not like our city water because of alkalinity. This has a neutral pH on these tanks, but you don't have the chlorine. Chlorine for trees, on some young trees, can be damaging, very damaging. And like I said, red buds is one tree that we found out that does react to heavily chlorinated water, like our city water. So the unique thing about these tanks, and the one thing that I was worried about, was the heat transfer. In the summertime, we're facing to the southwest. And this being black, you would think in the summertime the water would be scalding hot, you wouldn't be able to use it. But the temperature is cool to the touch. So we've never been able to get the water hotter than that in the heat of our summers, in August especially. And the reason is the water insulates itself. You've got 2,000 gallons of water in here, and because you've got such a large volume of water, the water temperature will never be damaging to a tree. It never will heat up. The system has what's called a clean out, and we'll show you all that in a close-up, but it has what's called a clean out, which is called a first flush. When water comes off the roof, it has contamination of leaves and insects, twigs from trees, and it goes down the pipe down into what's called a first flush out or a clean out. And what it does is it removes all that debris before it goes into the tank. The one thing when you do a rainwater harvester, you do not want the contamination. You don't want any organic matter to collect in the tank, because if you do, then it becomes, you'll develop an odor and it'll be a little bit rancid. So you want your water to remain clean. And that first, what's called a flush out, is very, very important to maintain a healthy system. Okay, this is what we talked about earlier. This is the clean out for the rainwater harvester. We have water that comes down with debris, leaves, twigs, insects, goes into this chamber here. Then there's a plastic ball that floats in here. And basically what it does is when the water surges downward, that ball will float up, allowing all the trash and the debris to collect in this lower chamber. And I'm going to show you what that system looks like inside. This is the ball, and what it does is, like we talked about, when the water rushes down, it causes that ball to float up for about a second or two, just enough to allow all the leaves and debris to settle down. Then what the ball does, it seats, it falls down. Then once it falls down and sets in place, the water flow will continue into the tank. So all this water going into the tank is going to be clean water, and all your trash and debris is going to be collected down here below. Now, the bottom of this pipe has what's called a clean out. And on the clean out, you have what's called a drip valve. And this valve here, what it does is it allows the water that's collected in here to drip out. Now, there might be some water in here. We're going to find out. Sometimes it gets clogged up. There's a lot of pressure. Gradually open it up. And you can see all the trash that just came out. And that's what we do not want into a rainwater harvester. We talked about organic matter. Or organic matter in a tank like this would not be good. You want to keep it clean. And this is what the system does, and it's working properly. Okay, here at the tree farm, we're in greenhouse 3, and we blend our own soil for the trees in containers. We use a pine bark that we purchase along with perlite and sphagnum peat. And the reason we use pine bark mulch is because the pH, the acidity, helps to neutralize. And also because of seed contamination. We used to use the mulch that we had out here, but because we have so much grassland around, and when our stockpiles are in that grassland area and we're mowing and you've got wind drift, you eventually get a lot of seed contamination. So we try to keep the soil sterile from that seed problem. So we do a blend. We do about it's 1 cubic yard of mulch with 1 to 2 bags of perlite, and then depending on if we're going to use vermiculite, it depends on what we're growing, we'll do maybe 1 bag of vermiculite with that blend. There is sometimes we do incorporate some tree fertilizer into that mix, but you're looking at maybe a pound per every cubic yard, so it's very minimum. And basically that's just enough nutrients just to get that tree growing for that first month. And that's all we're trying to do, is just to maintain that growth, to minimize that transplant shock. But what we'll do is we'll have our staff, our volunteers come into the house, and this is the working area. We'll put pots out around the pile, we'll have shovels, we'll have our trees to the side, and this is the working area. This is really where the tree production happens. And these trees will more than likely end up in HOA settings of parks, or they'll be eventually bumped up to a larger 15-gallon size tree, which we'll use those in our park settings. So the soil mixing right here is a very, very important part of the procedure of what we do out here. Right mixture, right blend of soil makes all the difference to grow a successful tree. Okay, at the tree farm, we deal with pests, and our most common pest, of course, is fire ants. And fire ants can either end up into a container tree like this or in the ground. Either way, we don't want them around the tree farm in a working condition. And to maintain and minimize this problem is we use one product, and it's basically a growth regulator for the fire ant, and it targets only the fire ant. That's the great thing about this new insect control, is that you can target one specific insect. And the product we use is Extinguish. And it's a very, very slow control. It doesn't work overnight because it's a growth regulator. It takes up to maybe sometimes 3 to 4 months before you can actually start seeing results. But it is a problem, and it's a matter of being on top of it. Once you start seeing fire ant mounds like this, it's a matter of reacting quickly. The other control we use inside here is weed control, and we use two products. We use a post pre-emergent, which is Surflan, or we'll use a glyphosate, which is Roundup. And we'll use it at a very low dosage. I usually try to do like what's called a 1% mixture of glyphosate, which is a very low dosage percentage-wise for trees. And it's basically, I come in here with a backpack sprayer, all my PPE on, and spray carefully around the tree, not getting anything on the trunk or stem, and keeping the area dry for at least, they say 6 hours, but I like to try to keep it for 24 hours. One thing about weed control, if you're doing application, conditions have to be right. You have to have moist conditions. You have to have warm temperatures. On average, on glyphosates, 65 degrees on average is ideal. If the temperatures are dropping any lower than that, then of course the product is going to work slower. Right now we're starting to get some early spring growth in here because of the greenhouse effect. If this was an outdoor tree, you probably wouldn't see this much weed coming up into the container, but because the house is kept at a constant temperature around 65 degrees, we're starting to get a little bit of early spring growth. I do use that post pre-emergent, which is a Surflan, which helps to keep the seedlings from germinating. It keeps it sterile. You have to be very careful on post pre-emergence, because I've found out on container stocks some trees react within that first season on growth. You'll have a little bit of a stunt of growth on some trees on using pre-emergence, and this is a liquid, so you have to be very, very quick, careful, but very knowledgeable of what you're spraying, and not to overspray, and not to use the wrong product on the wrong tree, because if you do, you'll end up wiping out a whole crop. Okay. At the tree farm, we grow trees in basically three different types of containers, or three different ways. This right here is what's called a grow bag, which is relatively new to the industry. And then you have your standard containers, hard plastic containers, and then the third one, of course, would be the field grown material. The advantage of grow bags for us, and if you listen to any grower in the industry, they're all going towards a grow bag, is you can develop a really nice root zone inside that container versus hard plastic. The root zone is going to be either heavily whorled or girdled, or the roots, when they go into a plastic container, when they hit that wall, they usually burn back because of the heat. So that's the advantage of the grow bags. They don't absorb and hold that heat like a hard nursery container would. So there are some advantages. That would be an advantage of growing into a tree into a grow bag. The disadvantage would be is the cost. The cost is considerably more per unit. Maybe not quite as twice as much as a container, but maybe 50%, 75% more. The other disadvantage is it's a one-time use. So these trees, these are Mexican plums. We'll hold these trees in these grow bags for maybe 2 to 3 years. And then after that, the only way to get the tree out of the container is you have to actually cut the material, which is a felt material, either felt or fiberglass material. You'll have to cut it 3 sides. You usually cut it from here,
here and here, and it's called like a triangle pattern. And when you cut it from here to here to here, you're able to fold the tree, or fold the bag down away from the tree, lay the tree on its side, and then the last step excuse me, would be to cut the bottom of the bag off. And then you would just pull the bag right off. Once you pull the bag off, then it would be a matter of just looking at the root zone. For us, what we'll do is, if it's heavily a heavy root mass, we would take a knife and score it up a little bit just to get those feeder roots to go outward. But that's the advantage of a grow bag. You typically can grow a tree a little bit faster in a bag also versus a container tree. Okay, we're now at the tree fields at Rolling Hills. This is field 3. We have a total of 3 fields that we grow our field grown stock. And we have a tree spade. We'll come out and harvest trees for particular products that we've got coming up. And but what we'll show you today is how we water. This is a drip system, and on the drip system we have, every 25 feet of that line you'll have a drip, inline drip. And this one is rated at 1 gallon per hour, and we'll turn the system on as needed. It might be, we might run it all day, once a week, twice a week, depending on the time of year. But this year, because we had such an early drought, we were having a problem now with rodents searching for water. And right now we've got a fox that lives out here, along with skunk, raccoons, of course squirrels. But now we're starting getting damage, and you can see the small teeth on this one in particular, which we think that the fox is probably tearing the hose up, and that particular animal is looking for water as well as the other ones are. So the bad thing about when we start getting damage like this is the labor that it takes to fix something. We had a problem a couple of years ago where we were repairing on an average of cost spending, which I was calculating labor and material was about $125 a day just from animals chewing into the line looking for water. So now we're looking at this problem again, and we don't use any type of traps, no baits. We leave the wildlife alone. They're beneficial for us. And so what we have to do is we have to think smart and figure out how to work with them. So what we're doing now is we have water troughs that we're placing out throughout the fields, and each water trough is shallow enough to where if an animal was to fall in it, they would be able to get out. That's the first thing. You want to make sure if you're setting up that type of rodent control or animal control that you have a shallow trough to where that animal would be able to get out. The second thing is to replenish it with fresh water. We're going to probably start doing our troughs starting this week because of the warmer weather, and replenishing with fresh water because we're starting to see this type of damage now. It's typically we don't see this until summer months when we're in the heat of the summer, like July and August. But because we went through a dry spell, animals are looking for water, and now this is additional maintenance of running a tree farm. A lot of time we talk about weed control, insect control, proper pruning, watering, but to add to the list is animal control, damage. Fortunately, we don't get the damage to the trees from rodents or from squirrels or rabbits when they're mature like this. When we plant young seedlings that are less than 2 feet tall, we've had them to go in and girdle around the base of the trees, and of course that kills the trees. But right now, this is our biggest problem we have is dealing with the ongoing problem with rodents doing a lot of damage. Typically, we prune for 2 reasons. We prune for corrective pruning, making sure we don't have no crossover limbs. You want that central leader. You want to try to recognize that central leader. We try to remove any low branching, and the reason being is 2 reasons. Is mechanical. We want to minimize mechanical damage when we're mowing the fields. We want to raise that canopy up just a little bit. And then if we're doing a herbicide treatment with Roundup, we want to avoid hitting those lower limbs. The general rule is you prune to where you leave, majority of tree canopy up above, 1/3 removal, and then the rest left alone. We've had incidents where you'll see people will go to a tree and they'll prune halfway up. We don't ever do that. We want to leave as much bottom growth on field grown trees as much as possible. That's where you're going to get the trunk diameter to develop. So for us, minimal pruning as much as possible, but you want to be able to maintain the health of the tree. Corrective pruning is essential, but you never ever want to overwork a tree. That's in a field grown situation like this, that's the worst thing you can do, because if you do that, you're going to end up compromising the tree. You're going to slow the growth down, or you're just going to ruin the growth habit of a tree like that. Okay, this is our balled and burlap production. This is a bur oak, and I would estimate the tree to maybe be 7 years old. We have a tree spade that's attachment to a skid steer that we will go out and dig the trees behind us in the fields. And then when we bring the trees up here, this is the holding area. We'll ball and burlap them with burlap and twine. This is the twine on top. Now these we harvested last year. We have them healed into the mulch over the year. They were supposed to go out to a project last year, but that project didn't happen through either it be the weather might have been a problem. It might have been too wet for the conditions to plant that tree. So what we'll do is we'll just hold the trees over for this year, and we'll just pull them up out of the ground. We take a shrink wrap, and we'll wrap that root ball, because the burlap is only good once you heal them into the soil. That burlap will decompose after about a month or two, so it doesn't last very long, and it's intended to do that, because when you plant a tree, you want this to eventually break down. The shrink wrap is just used for transporting purposes. It helps to maintain the moisture and then protects the ball from crumbling or falling apart. We have a group that's coming out to pick these trees up. It's a partnership with an HOA, Green Belt area in Fort Worth. And what we'll do is our staff will pick these trees up carefully, load them up on a flat trailer, and it's the responsibility of that individual that's picking up the trees. They secure the load. All we do is we just load the trees up. If we're not loading the trees, then what we'll do is we'll pick the trees up, and we'll go and we'll plant trees with our equipment, with our trailers, and we use the same process. We just take chains and hook them up and lift them up and place them up on the trailer, secure the load, and then go to the job site. After we plant trees in our parks, depending on the water agreement, most of the time if we're planting, we're the ones that are going to be watering that tree, and usually we like to try to keep it on a 2-year watering schedule, possibly 3 years. Eventually we want to stop watering the trees, because at that time the tree should be adapted in or acclimated into the conditions to where it can take its own water in without having supplemental watering. If it's another project that maybe we plant, there might be a volunteer that waters the tree. We have done projects like that. Or if it's in a park area that maybe has irrigation, we'll plant the tree, and then it might be that the park is irrigated through an HOA or a private group. Out here we have a number of species of trees. Behind us we have Eve's necklace. Further down the line we have bald cypress, red oak. We try to diversify when we plant trees in a park setting. We never ever go with one species. We want to diversify always because of disease threats and insect threats. So that's the reason why we have such a large selection of trees. And another reason is height requirement. Sometimes we have an area that we need a shorter tree that maybe won't mature as high up as a bur oak. So that's why we might use a Eve's necklace, because we might have clearance problems with overhead lines, or not necessarily planting underneath the overhead lines, but maybe we're planting close to electrical lines. And that's pretty much it.